And good afternoon. Welcome to the May 19th, 2021 meeting of the Police and Fire Commission in the city of Fitchburg. It's a few minutes late. We're starting at about 4:35, but we do have a full quorum and actually a full attendance, I believe. So the first item on the agenda is to call the meeting to order, so I could do a call to order. The second item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. So there are not just the previous meeting's minutes, but there were several. In fact, there were 4. So there were the April 19th, the April 21st, the April 26th, and the May 10th. Did the commissioners have a chance to review those? And is there any comment or changes that need to be made? I hear none. Rosa, did you have a chance to take a look? No? Yes?
I move to the approval of the minutes.
So should we go through, do you think, and approve each and every one? Or I guess I'm okay if people all had a chance to review all of them. I'm okay to do this all in one. I did have a chance to review all of them, and I think they were fine. So you can make a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes. And are you suggesting, I'm sorry, all of them at the same time?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll second.
Okay, very good. And so all those in favor of approving the minutes, all 4 of the previous meeting's minutes, say aye.
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 And anyone objecting, say nay. And so motion is passed unanimously. Next order of business is the update to the Pfc Rules and Regulations. Sarah, I believe you had this agenda item.
So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the Pfc Rules and Regulations. Bear with me as I get this up on my screen. All right, sorry about that. I had closed it out, so I wasn't able to share it. So now I've got it. So I'm going to share my screen. And so with tracked changes, you'll be able to see the couple of changes. So one of the only 2 changes that we made on here, the first one being in section 1.4. The questions from our prior VP was, does the VP have to be elected annually as well? So it is the president and the vice president. So we thought just making sure to add elected annually would, help avoid any confusion like that.
I do have a question on that one. So I actually think that that's a great idea that we formalize that. But is that coming from the statutes, or is that, I guess, how was that determined?
Yep, that's in the ordinance.
Okay.
Yep. So I did have our city attorney look into that, and she confirmed that, yeah, the president and the vice president of the PFC are elected annually.
Any other questions on that point? Everyone's saying no? All right.
Okay, and then the second part was section 2.1. The question, when we first put these rules and regulations together, we actually had that the commission would actually assign who the interim chief would be, but the city already has an established process where the deputy police chief assumes the police chief role in their absence. So this would be a reassignment of duties, basically for our interim to fill the police chief role. So we wanted to make sure that our rules were within the statute, the ordinance, which does not allow the commission to just choose anyone to be in the interim role. The city already has a process in place for reassignment of duties. The commission, of course, always approves promotions, but this is not a promotion for a deputy chief to fill a chief role in an interim while we recruit. It's really a reassignment of duties. So the rewording here is just that the commission will meet and approve the process for a permanent appointment, but that we already have an established process where the interim chief assumes the chief role.
And does anybody on the commission have any questions about that? Tom?
So I seem to recall, and I didn't have a chance to go back and look at the meeting when we discussed this prior in the past, maybe it was in the fall when we were reviewing these rules and regulations. And I'm curious, Sarah, why the change? Our city attorneys had looked it over prior to this. I believe it was a topic of discussion, and I'm just curious why the change.
Yeah, so why the change is that we find ourselves in a situation where we will be having a vacant police chief position. And, we were going to, what happened last time in 2017 is our mayor and our city administrator had a discussion with the interim deputy and asked that person to step up to be the police chief while we recruited. And then they brought it to the PFC as a notification. It was, I sent a video clip to the PFC just to kind of share what had happened in 2017, but there wasn't any type of approval needed for our interim, or for our deputy chief to be the police chief in the interim while we recruit. So when we were looking at our rules and regulations that we had updated, we noticed that it almost made it sound like it wouldn't necessarily be the deputy chief that would assume that police chief role. So we wanted to make sure it was clear that in the event of a vacancy, our deputy chief would assume the police chief role. Or this could go for the fire department as well. This is for the police and fire chief.
Follow up, Tom? Oh, pardon me. Go ahead, Rosa.
I remember the discussion. I remember we looked at the job description, and it did say of the deputy chief, and it did say that he would assume that role in the event of a vacancy and an absence. And we discussed for some reason that we didn't want to put that in there, but obviously there's already process in place, and I think Tom brought this up several times within the last month, because he thought there would be a conflict of interest in the event that the deputy chief would be interested in applying for the position of chief, which it's also another issue that it's not actually accurate, so.
Yeah, I guess, so I'm not an attorney, and but I've taken a look at this, and I assessed some of the information that Tom sent as well. And it seems like the attorney for the city has made a determination that that's how this should move forward. That's what we did in 2017. It obviously conflicts with what we wrote in our rules, and to Tom's point, I think it was missed, essentially, in our original go-through of those, because it was reviewed by the city attorney. But it does seem like that's the appropriate way to proceed with the rules and regulations. I, too, though, have concerns about the competitive advantage potentially. I don't know if it actually is or not, but somebody's fulfilling that role temporarily and also applying for the position. I want to make sure that everything is equitable as possible. But I don't know if there's anything we can actually do about that at this point, because I do think the rules should be changed. Yes?
I'll just offer, I certainly recognize concerns that would be presented as far as an interim person having a potential, insight, so to speak. But I think if you look at how you would handle that situation as a commission, I think it would be clear, ideally an interim person is going to recuse themselves from the meeting at any point in time in which there was going to be discussion about the process, the questions, the panels, and those sorts of things. You would have the interim chief, if they were an applicant, come to the meetings to handle the day-to-day business associated with the police department and the PFC relationship. And then, ideally, again, they're going to recuse themselves from the room and, only have access to that which any other public-facing person would have, member of the public, available through fact, through the agendas and so forth. And if they elected not to recuse themselves, then the commission would ask them to step out. That's how I would see it play out to help alleviate some of those concerns.
Yeah, and after I considered more too, I also think with objective benchmarks in the interview questions themselves, I think that, we are the folks that are going to be determining those things, and by using those objective benchmarks, we can be objective. Did you have something, Tom?
Sure. So two thoughts. One, and I'm not making any legal comments or providing any legal advice or counsel, but I think there can only be one chief of police, and whatever you call that individual, interim, limited, whatever it is, that is a role for the Police and Fire Commission. I don't think that the city can appoint a chief of police regardless of what you call that person. Second, as I just Google, interim police chief appointed Police and Fire Commission, it looks like police and fire commissions around the state are appointing interim police chiefs to that role. And again, to me, that seems like the appropriate role of the Police and Fire Commission. These rules and regulations passed through legal review 4 or 5 months ago without, we talked about that issue specifically. So, at the end of the day, the individual who's filling that role, I think, I agree that I don't think it's such a competitive advantage that we can't be objective about it. And I do think there are ways to kind of wall off that individual from any of those advantages. But I still think it's a Police and Fire Commission responsibility to appoint the interim chief.
Well, it seems to me that this is open for debate and that we probably would need to either meet with the city attorney, the advisor to this board, and bring this up. Because this means that the deputy chief job description will have to change, because that's included in the job description. We would have more authority at that moment if this happens, so I'm assuming that's what we need to do next.
Yes, Chief Reckland.
I'm trying not to insert myself too much into this conversation because this obviously is a commissioner's role here. But I would be leery about changing position description and removing language from the deputy police chief's job description that says they will serve as chief in the absence of the chief of police. Because there are many situations, be it out of state or out of country travel, for instance, by an existing police chief, wherein the deputy police chief needs to have that authority bestowed upon them through position description and process to make the decisions in the absence of the police chief. So I would definitely caution modifying position description. And I'm not an attorney either, but I would caution that I don't know as though making or even recommending position description modifications is under the purview of the Police and Fire Commission either. So I would just caution that. And I do think that situations arise. Obviously, this is one of them where, and they could come up at any time, where a police chief may come down with an illness, take a new role, whatever the case may be, where the city has to have the ability to have somebody immediately assume the role of interim police chief. And therefore, I would be cautious about even removing that ability from the city itself.
Right, yeah.
Clearly there can be debate as to whether or not there needs to be formal approval by the Police and Fire Commission after that selection is made. At this point in time, it appears as though the city's position from the city attorney is that the process already exists, and based upon the past practice, that was merely an announcement at the last occasion of this to the PFC to inform them of the change and the appointment that had been made.
Yeah, and I'm not even suggesting any changes. I'm just saying because I was of the opinion that we already had a process in place and that it would be the assistant chief that would assume the role. But obviously, there was enough discussion and controversy or questions about it that I think it would be helpful to meet with have the attorney come, because she gave us an opinion as to why we don't have that power. That's what she says. basically. Other departments do, but we don't have that one, according to her statement here. So that would be my suggestion, that we meet with her.
Yeah, and if I recall that conversation, just thinking back to it, I believe and I think that to the chief's point, we talked very carefully about, there's obviously emergency times when people would need to step into that role. The commission's not available to actually assist in any way. And then those, we needed an authority structure and a power and command, right? And a way to pass that on. And I think then that the follow-up conversation is that the police and fire commission thought that we had the ability post that at the next meeting to make a determination on who that interim chief was. And there obviously is some debate about that at this point from the city attorney, and they're coming down on the side of not. I guess in the interim, right now we have an interim chief. Or some should say that starting in July, we will have an interim chief unless we take action. So we do have time in order to meet with the city attorney. And I guess I would propose that that's probably the path we'd go, but any other thoughts from any of the other commission members?
Shana?
Yeah, Sheena?
I must have missed the email. There's an email regarding this discussion, but I think if this follows the chain of command and it's simply put, and I don't know as who else we would want in this interim position other than the deputy chief or assistant chief. And so removing these words and removing us from the process, I'm comfortable with that because that is the chain of command and that's who would be most qualified and most experienced to sit in that seat. Can somebody tell me the opposite of why we would not want the assistant or deputy chief to take that interim position?
Tom?
I don't think we would necessarily not want that as a rule, but I would want to have a discussion around it because I do think that's a power that we as the Police and Fire Commission should have, and a discussion we should have as representatives of the city and those in charge of appointing and hiring chiefs. So it very well could be the current individual who has that in their job description. That makes sense. If the city's already got a process to go about that, I think that makes sense. But this is more about kind of the role of the Police and Fire Commission and the duties that we have, which are intended to be separate from the city council, the mayor, the other political bodies.
Do you mind if I can provide a couple, sorry, everyone. I could provide a couple of reasons why you might not want the deputy chief to be the interim chief. One would be maybe there's an incident that happens between the chief and the deputy chief and why the chief is leaving. Hopefully not, but that could be one reason why. The other thing could be, for myself, even looking at the city administrator when we placed that position, I did not want the interim city administrator to be someone who's applying for that role. I wanted to keep that person kind of separate out of that process, whether it was to provide maybe a sign of favoritism or whatever else might be. I thought there could be some conflicts of interest possibly as well in that. So I think that, to me, looking at that, I don't know that you would want, if that person is going for that role, I don't know that you would want that interim chief to be in that. I don't know what we did when you were hired, Chad. I can't remember what happened there. I don't believe that you were the interim chief, but I think that's another instance where you might not want that if that person is going for that role.
Chad?
Yeah, we did briefly talk about, obviously if a interim police chief was also competing or an applicant for the permanent position, so that they would have the integrity to recuse themselves during any sorts of conversation, and or the Police and Fire Commission would certainly remove them from the conversation. But I do see potential concerns with a department our size if you don't typically, unless there's a prevailing reason not to have the deputy police chief move into the interim role. For instance, if the deputy police chief is competing or an applicant for the police chief job, then in our rank structure, the next available person is a lieutenant. So then would you make a lieutenant the interim police chief for a couple of months, who would now go from being a subordinate to the deputy police chief to the deputy chief now becoming a subordinate of the interim police chief? And hypothetically, if that lieutenant who's the interim police chief is not an applicant, they would then return to a subordinate role in whatever way the process shook out, because clearly even if the deputy chief did not get the position, they would still be the supervisor of that lieutenant. So I think there's also some rank dynamics in play here that could complicate matters even further without that. And I do understand where Commissioner O'Day is coming from as far as what, if any, role does the commission have in affirming the appointment of interim chief. And I think that's obviously where the question lies at this point.
Can I just say something really quick?
Yes.
When it comes to, HR processes, I mean, this is pretty normal where we have our most qualified person in the department become the interim of the leader of the department. It doesn't necessarily give them a leg up in recruiting. I mean, it's pretty normal that you're going, for example, like our highest level engineer will typically be appointed our director of public works, for example, while we're recruiting. When we're choosing who to put in the interim position, we're not asking ourselves, is this person going to apply for the position? And if so, we're not going to put them into it. We're really choosing who is the most qualified person. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that even if a lot of times people in interim roles will be the ones to apply for the position too. So just from the HR world. So.
Sheena?
I think, did Monona just went through this, right? Because their interim police chief was, she was applying as well. And I would love to get their input if they had any conflicts with this. I don't know. I'd like to hear, I'd be curious to see what they had with that process, if that was any conflicts or troubles. I don't think she was appointed the position. I don't know if that's official or if that's came out or what, but I'm not certain. So just somebody close to home that might have some insight to help us kind of navigate through this.
I agree with what you both said when Sarah said this is nothing new. I've seen it play out before in the department where I worked before, the one that Monona just had. And I think we could separate the two. I don't see a conflict necessarily in having the deputy chief even apply for the job if he wanted to. Because there's already mechanisms in place to prevent from for that person to have an advantage. I mean, we get people from all over with all kinds of experience who have been chiefs in other departments, so they do have an advantage to someone who doesn't have that experience. So I don't have a problem with that. Right now, I feel that we already have, I see what Tom is saying about we having the power to appoint that person or to give him the okay, but it says here that we don't have that power. So it would require making some changes. So are we going to try to do that right now during this process, or are we thinking of reviewing this, and then maybe in the future?
Well, one question maybe, Rosa, where are you seeing that it says we don't have that power?
I'm looking at the email that the city attorney sent to Sarah, and maybe you don't have that.
Oh,
that's what I'm referring
yeah, I don't think I've seen that. So I think there are two issues that we're kind of talking about. One is who appoints the interim police chief? And then a second issue of should that interim police chief, whomever that is, be available to apply for the police chief role? On the first issue, I don't think we necessarily need to decide now. We've got a little time before that happens. And I'm not saying that the current city process isn't the best process, and we certainly should pick the best, most qualified individual but we should be the ones doing it, I think. And I haven't seen the city attorney's email.
But that's your opinion, or are you basing that on looking at the statute and saying that that's what we should do?
Yes, right.
So what did you look at? I'd like to read that exactly.
What, the statute?
Yeah, what you're saying, that we do have the authority to say that we're having conflict opinion. You're saying that we do have the authority to do that?
I think the Police and Fire Commission does, just based on the statutes and what our role is.
Okay, so I would love to see exactly what you're referring to.
Right. Yep. But, so that's one issue. The second issue, can the interim police chief apply for the role of the police chief? That's something I guess we decide as well, a second issue.
Yep, I think so too. And I guess I would tend to think that we do have some time here. So, meaning like this isn't an urgent matter that we need to decide tonight. And I think that the question that I have, I guess, is that how do we actually proceed in gathering information and making those determinations? To Rosa's point, like what evidence or what information should we be assessing? Should we be meeting with the city attorney to get her full-throated sort of opinion and reasoning, and so forth? So I guess I would like some direction. If we're going to go that route and not modify this and not essentially approve what we're talking about here, and put that up to a vote, what's the path forward, right? So I think that speaking with the city attorney is probably first and foremost.
I think so.
And then the question is, do we bring that person and ask that person to come to the next meeting so that we can talk that through? Do we do that as a sort of sidebar and one or two?
So our next
people
meeting
represented?
is in June. And our chief leaves July 12th.
Yes, and I think it's June 23rd, I think, the meeting.
Okay. Will that give us enough time, or do we want to do it sooner?
How about this? How about if I reach out to the city attorney and I see if I can get her, a written recommendation and where she's getting this information and where she's coming from. I know she also consulted with our employment attorney too, so it's not just our city attorney. So with both of those legal opinions, why don't I send those legal opinions to the PFC? Then you can review it. And if you have further questions, just respond back to me and let me know. And then I can have that all ready for the June PFC meeting. So that way, then we can actually make a decision on the language. Would that work out okay?
Yes, I think that seems like a good way to proceed. Because then we would get the information, we would get and I just want to be clear about a couple things. We're not disagreeing necessarily fully with the city attorney. We just want further information, want, I guess, a full-throated explanation. So I think that's probably the way to move forward. I think we should probably make a motion to that point and vote to make sure everybody wants to proceed in that way.
Well, so I move that we accept Sarah's recommendation that the attorneys will send us some information or
I think that she said legal opinion.
legal opinions regarding this issue, and then, that will be the first thing. So I move that we accept Sarah's recommendation that she will contact the city attorney for a legal opinion to be drafted and communicate to us before our next meeting,
So that we can make a determination.
so we can make a determination.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye?
Aye. All in objection, say no, or nay. Okay, so moved. Thank you, Sarah.
And if I could, I might suggest, in addition to the city attorney and the opinion in June, it may be best to also have the city bring a recommendation for who would be assigned to the interim role of chief. So that to the extent that we as a PFC decide that that is our role, that the meeting is properly noticed and we have the ability for the public to comment if they want to on who is appointed to that role of interim chief. Does that make sense?
No, I'm sorry, explain that again.
So I'm thinking, if we come to the June meeting and we as a PFC, if we decide that it is a PFC role to decide who the interim chief is, we would want to, I think, have the opportunity at that meeting to appoint an interim chief. So we'd want to prepare for that, as well as the PFC. If the PFC decides it's not our role and that the city can do whatever they want, then we wouldn't have to worry about it, and it wouldn't be something we need to address. But I think we should come prepared to address that, because we want an appointed interim chief by July.
Okay, so what do we need, if that's the case, that we need to come up with prepared to present names?
I think so. I think Sarah should come with a recommendation for an interim police chief,
Sarah,
right?
recommend someone to us?
Right?
Yep.
So we actually already have someone in the room probably who is going to be recommended. Our current deputy police chief, Matt Leahy, I believe is there tonight. And I believe Aaron and our acting administrator had consulted with him and asked him if he would be willing to step up and be our interim chief. So we can certainly talk about that at our next meeting for sure, since that sounds like the route that we're going.
Okay. But I agree, because there is limited time between those two meetings, and we need to have somebody up. I guess I'd just broadly say that this is less about, for me, this is less about this particular interaction. It's more about the overall authority of the commission and making determinations on that. And so nothing to be said about the current deputy chief and the recommendation or the process that's in place right now at all. This is really just about the purview of the committee.
Just one question, so in the event we get let's say we have the authority, and there's a recommendation, there's a possibility that we won't go with that recommendation, that we don't have to go with it, right?
That is a possibility, yes.
Which will complicate things, I think, a little bit.
See, but I don't, so the current process under our rules and regulations says, in the event of a vacancy, the city has already established an interim process in which an individual will assume the role of interim chief until the commission meets and approves the assignment of the interim chief and the process for a permanent appointment is made. So the current process exists, and the deputy apparently under the city's policy, and I don't know if we've ever seen that policy, but that's the current process. The deputy will remain there until the commission meets and approves someone else. So I don't think there's a risk of kind of a failure in continuity of rank or leadership or service in the department. Frankly, I wish that the city would have come to us and said, we recommend this deputy as the next interim police chief today, instead of recommending that we change a rule that we just approved 4 months ago with legal approval and legal review.
Yeah, so I guess I think that for me anyways, like I was saying before, I think it's about the purview of the committee. And I think that the presentation of and recommendation from the city would, because we don't have necessarily other candidates we would bring, right? Just in a practical matter. I think that is who we would probably go with, and we would trust the system that is currently in place and ask questions along those lines. But the point is, I think, is that I think the purview of the committee is to make that approval and to ask those questions and to make sure that make sure there is civilian oversight in that process. So I think that really, for me anyways, that is what the guts of this is.
Before we end this topic, I just want to remind the commission that 62.13 only allows this PFC to appoint to as far as hiring, promotion, suspension, demotion, and termination. So what this is a reassignment of duties. Our deputy chief is not being promoted to a police chief position. He's being reassigned to a police chief position while we recruit. So that's where our city attorney and our employment attorney were coming from. So that's why we want to make sure that whatever when we're notifying you that, yep, our deputy chief is going to be our interim chief while we recruit, we want to make sure our rules and regulations are in line. And that was something that was missed by our legal, but we just want to make sure those two things match. I just want to remind the commission on that statute.
Okay, thank you. So next item on the agenda is discussion of approval of updated meeting times for the commission. I brought this item forth. I'm proposing that we move the meetings for the Police and Fire Commission here in Fitchburg from 4:30 to 5. I think I've struggled to get here a few times at 4:30. Tom's rolled in at 4:30 a couple times. One time I actually missed because of prior commitment, just through work. If it's not objectionable to other commission members, I think it may help us form, we haven't really had a problem forming quorum, but I think it would be helpful in order to form quorum on a more regular basis and make everybody get here exactly on time. So I would put forth.
I don't have a problem moving to 5.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Okay. So I move the official commission time, meeting times for police and fire to 5 o'clock rather than 4 on that third Wednesday of each month.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Objections, say nay. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is public appearances for non-agenda items. So are there anybody? I don't see anybody. Anybody on Zoom? Okay. Report from the from the fire department is next.
Good evening, everyone. What you will have in front of you here shortly is our staffing report. Calls for service, just as an aside, is reflective of the fact that we are coming out of a pandemic year, and it looks like people are interested to get outside and do stuff, which has increased our call volume. So we anticipate an active summer, and hope that well, let's just say that we hope that nobody is injured or has any ill events happen to them, but we're here just in case. Going down to our staffing report, things are fairly set as far as the numbers, the normal ebbs and flows that occur with a combination paid on call, paid on premise department. We've had some folks leave based on other opportunities. We've had a couple of resignations, and now we have established the process to bring paid on call and interns on staff. So those numbers are consistent with what we would see from year to year. Some other announcements will be made in closed session as far as resignations and then recommendation for employment. So other than that, I know that you've had access to this in advance of the meeting. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions before we move to the next agenda item, which is closed session.
I do not. Any of the other commissioners have questions? Okay. With that said, can somebody read the closed session note?
Sure. Hold on, let me just, okay. Pursuant to section 19.85(1) of Wisconsin statutes, the commission will move into closed session for the purpose of considering employment, promotion, compensation, and performance evaluation of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, more specifically to notice the commission on a resignation and to make hiring recommendations for second-year fire science intern.
I'll second.
Okay. Want to move to closed session? Raise your hand and acknowledge by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. So moved. All right, welcome back. Any actions coming out of closed session for the fire department?
Yeah, I do have a motion. I move that we accept the recommendation of the fire chief for a conditional offer to Matthew Sushhommel for the second-year fire service intern.
Is there a second? There's a second? Okay. And all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any objections, please say nay. And the motion is passed. Is there another item coming out of closed?
So we do need to acknowledge the resignation of,
Not the individual, just the acknowledgement of a resignation.
okay.
So the Police and Fire Commission acknowledges the resignation of a lieutenant in the Fitchburg Fire Department given by the chief. Next order of business is the paid-on-call lieutenant recruitment process update, I assume?
Yeah, so we didn't necessarily want to get into the process today. I know that your agenda is full, and I wanted to make sure that we were able to communicate the resignation first. Also, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of the fact that we're giving careful consideration to the process and not just jumping in to replace somebody because the vacancy exists. One of the things that has been shared with our membership is just because there's a vacancy doesn't necessarily mean that we will fill that position. The last thing that I want to do is put somebody into a supervisory position, especially a company officer position, because of the fact that it does have an impact on morale. One of the most influential positions in the fire department is the first line leader, that company officer. And putting the wrong person in there will ultimately set the impression for the shift, for the day, for everything that gets done. The ability to select a process and to identify potential competencies that exist within the department is what I'll be doing over the next month, and I'll be able to hopefully provide you a recommendation as far as process looking at our next PFC meeting. In addition to that, I've been made aware of the fact that there's going to be other retirements, resignations that take place within our ranks. And so I want to do a careful look at our organizational chart to see how that might be impacted. And before we just put people into position, what we might have to do from an organizational standpoint. And I can share more as far as details go as soon as I have a better impression of what that time frame looks like and what we may need to do from either a recruitment or a promotional standpoint.
Okay, we look forward to that at the next meeting. Next order of business is the report from the police department. Item A, I guess, is technically on the agenda. It's the announcement of the interim police chief, but given a previous conversation, I think we're going to take that up at the next meeting. And then next on the agenda is the staffing report.
You had the staffing report sent to you in advance of the meeting, just to cover the highlights. We currently have 4 police officer positions that are vacant, and we have 3 police officers who are on leave or restricted duty. That would be extended leave or restricted duty, which creates 7 patrol positions that are currently unfilled. Obviously, we are concluding a hiring process for police officer. We'll certainly update you on that here in one of the upcoming agenda items. And the demographic information has been updated as well. Any questions?
I don't. Tom? do you have-
One question. So if 7 officers are out, it's a roughly 15% hole in the department. Is that resulting in increased time for current officers in terms of overtime?
What that may mean, depending upon the shift and where the vacancies are at, it may mean some additional overtime to hit our minimum coverage numbers, or we may be running at minimum coverage numbers without the overtime, but that means there's no really additional bodies in our preferred staffing levels, so.
And just if I recall from past meetings, the current ratio of police officers to citizens is below the standard that we want to be at, correct?
Typically, we've tried to staff at about 1.8 officers or sworn positions per 1,000 residents. I can't tell you exactly what the numbers are. I'm kind of eagerly awaiting the 2020 census numbers to see exactly where we're at, but we had been trending closer to 1.7 prior to the upcoming census number announcement here.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on the staffing report? Okay. Police officer and Town of Madison recruitment update.
So I can start this, Sarah, and if there's anything you want to add, feel free. But where we're currently at with both of our hiring processes, I'll start with the traditional Fitchburg officer process that we've talked about. We have 4 candidates who are all working their way through their conditions that were approved at the last Police and Fire Commission meeting. 2 of them actually have completed the conditions. The other 2, one is wrapping them up, ideally wrapping them up this week, and the other is wrapping their conditions up next week. So those 4 candidates, assuming again that all of them successfully pass their conditions, will start employment June 1st. They will begin the 720-hour law enforcement academy at Fox Valley Technical College on June 2nd, and will conclude that academy on October 8th, is it meant? So they'll obviously be gone for a couple of months during their academy training, and then come back and begin the field training process with us, which is typically about a 5 to 6 month process. We do have one individual that we are recommending at least be on an eligibility list. That will give us some additional time to evaluate their candidacy in the event there is an opening that occurs in advance of the next process that's beginning or will be requested. It will give us an opportunity to at least have somebody on a list that we can consider for employment at that point in time. I think that the additional time will be beneficial for this applicant to be, for us, it will be beneficial for us to have to evaluate their suitability for the department further. Anything to add at all, Sarah, on the PO process?
No, that's very thorough. Looking forward to having all 4 of them start on June 1st.
So basically then, what I would request is that anyone in that police officer process, Sarah, that had chief's interviews, if they haven't already been notified of where they're at in the process, they could go ahead and be notified, and then we can confirm the individual's name that will remain on an eligibility list for the time with you tomorrow, if that works. And that's
That works.
and if that's acceptable to the commission. Okay, and you have seen the names of the individuals that were presented at last month's meeting. The 4 officers who have the conditional offers and are working their way through, that is public information at this point in time. That's Jordan Fesky, Tyler Newell, Braden Bauman, and Davin Hamburg. I got them all right? Got to try to keep my memory fresh on these things. So those are the 4 officers, again, that are all in various stages of working through their conditions of employment, and again, would start June 1st. I will move on to the Town of Madison, if you guys are ready for that. The Town of Madison police officer recruitment that we were working jointly with the City of Madison Just as a refresher, that is a process that was specifically for Town of Madison police officers who had expressed employment interest in either the City of Madison or the City of Fitchburg or both. Panel interviews were held last week, I believe it was. And of the two candidates that had expressed interest in Fitchburg Police Department were interviewed. I was informed the panel scored them high enough to recommend them move on to a chief's interview. So Matt and I will be conducting interviews of those two candidates on next Tuesday afternoon. And we'll be able to report to the commission in June what steps we would be taking, if any, with those applicants. Questions on the Town of Madison process?
Yes, I have one. I guess we have 4 open vacancies. We filled those with the previous list, and then we also have one on the waiting list, so to speak. But there are 2 potential candidates. Are those to fill roles that are post the annexing of the Town of Madison? And I guess, is there status in regards to those positions?
So, yes and no. I suppose it's possible that they could be, if we've select them for hire or recommend them for hire, and a vacancy were to come in the police department in advance of the town absorption, or really in advance of the city creating additional positions, then it could be possible that we would be able to offer them a position with the police department earlier. In the absence of a position becoming available in the police department, if they are selected or recommended for hire, then they would likely be utilized to fill any additional positions that the city would be budgeting for in the 2022 budget. Right now, there is a request, or we'll obviously be putting a forthcoming budget request that will request 4 sworn positions. And I know that in ongoing conversations with the mayor, I don't know if all 4 of them will be included in his budget or not, but we certainly have been talking, and you can see where the latest update on the Town of Madison from a citywide staffing perspective was during the committee of the whole meeting, I think in January, where it was at least identified that perhaps 3 of those requested positions would be funded beginning in January. But again, obviously that is subject to council approval and consideration.
Okay. All right, thanks for the update. Are there any other questions about the town? Yep, go ahead.
I will just add, while it's not necessarily the purview of the Police and Fire Commission here, there are ongoing conversations with the Town of Madison and the City of Madison Police Department specifically about that absorption and how logistically it will work, and the timing of Fitchburg assuming police services in our absorbed section of the Town of Madison, likely in advance of the actual absorption date of October 30th of 2022. So just as an informational item, those discussions are taking place. And obviously from a larger perspective, the 3 municipalities as a whole are talking about the whole process of absorption and the logistics of that.
Okay, additional questions about the Town of Madison process? Okay. Next agenda item is closed session. Would somebody use the closed session verbiage, please?
Yep, go ahead.
I'll move that the commission go into closed session for the purpose of considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, more specifically, to notice the commission on a resignation.
And do I have a movement or a motion to move to closed session?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess that was it, wasn't it? Sorry.
You move.
All right. Everybody that wants to move to open session, respond by saying aye and raising your hand.
Aye?
Aye. Any nays?
Closed session.
Closed session. All right, welcome back. We're coming out of closed session for the police department. And there's just an acknowledgement of the resignation of a police officer by Chief Brecklin. The next item of business is police chief recruitment process.
All right, so we had our equitable hiring tool meeting yesterday. It was such a great group meeting, a great discussion around. I sent you the tool earlier today. We had Rosa, who can speak to it as well. We had Gabriella, who was one of our council members, part of it. We had Jeremy Saffold, who is our police department member. Harper Donahue, who is our City of Madison HR director, and then Colleen Chase, a community member, and Dorothy Krause, a community member. So it went really, really well. Rosa, did you have any, before I get into it, any words or any suggestions or ideas about how you thought it went?
Sure. I agree with what you just said. The meeting was very productive, very insightful. And it was good to see people that I have never had any contact with before, just to be able to interact with them and at times be on the same page, which was very good. So, yeah, and I have to acknowledge Sarah in particular. You did an excellent job getting us together and keeping us on track. So you will see the results of that.
Yeah, so I can either share my screen and walk you through the tool, or I can give you kind of a summary. It was emailed out earlier, but you know, we had a limited time, so we had an hour and a half, but we did talk about everything from the demographics of policing, of the police department, and then we talked about minimum qualifications. We talked about education and experience requirements. You know, overall, they really do feel you have to have some leadership experience in policing to be the next police chief. You know, the team thought at least 7 years of supervisory experience in a police department, even 5 years was a little not enough. That they must have experience working with diverse communities or within diverse communities and have that demonstrated experience with diversity, equity, inclusion. So, you know, being that we're one of the most diverse cities in Dane County, that's really important. Another recommendation from the team was that they must have excellent public speaking experience and the ability to represent the department in a positive light. So that's the ability to communicate well is going to be really critical. Also that experience with personnel management, you know, they're overseeing a very large, you know, pretty large, good sized department. So having that policy making experience, union experience is a big plus. So overall, those were the big key takeaways for experience. Then we talked about education. We talked about having that associate's degree or a bachelor's degree requirement. And we were kind of torn on that. So some of the members thought, you know, as a minimum qualification, someone with an associate's degree, we wouldn't want to necessarily to screen out somebody who had 20 plus years in an associate's degree. Maybe they didn't have the opportunity to go on for more school, but they would still be a great candidate. So others felt that, you know, having that bachelor's degree showed that they were taking initiative, continuing their education. So we wanted to bring it back to the PFC to get your thoughts about the education requirement. But it was an interesting discussion there about, again, you know, what makes you minimally qualified? You know, is it desired to have a bachelor's? Most likely. The associate's degree, of course, is what we require for our police officers. So we felt we should at least require that for the chief. And then from there, we had a really good discussion on the employee survey. A lot of great ideas. So as you recall, we have the proposed employee and community survey. And, you know, we want it, of course, in Spanish and English, but they talked about how do we get the survey out to areas of Fitchburg that aren't near City Hall or who might not see it on the city's Facebook page or other sites so that we get more participation. We're talking about adding demographics on there so we can actually see who's filling it out, including, you know, is it somebody from the Fitchburg Police Department? So we're thinking about adding that and then adding the teamwork and respect, which are 2 additional values that the police department holds. So still asking the community what the desired traits of a police chief is, but adding in teamwork and respect to that survey. And then really great supplemental question ideas. Again, these are the essay questions that they have on the application. So when they apply, they answer these questions. And there were some really great ideas related to officer wellness, related to failing recruitment efforts. How do we recruit and retain right now in this type of environment? So a lot of great ideas, and I have some samples. So, you know, we have to make some decisions today, the PFC, as far as the minimum qualifications. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the job description, because this is where we're going to actually pull our job posting and make our job brochure from. But I didn't make any changes to the job description from the Equitable Hiring Tool meeting. I'm just bringing the ideas forward to you. Ultimately, the PFC is going to choose what updates to make to that. So bear with me here while I find the job description. Got a lot of windows open. But any questions about the hiring tool meeting? I mean, it was great. I mean, we had a lot of differing perspectives and thoughts and ideas related to the recruitment. So it was really, really nice to get together.
Sir, I have a clarification. On the job description, I thought I read that it said that a bachelor's degree was required and a graduate degree was preferred. Could you comment on
Exactly,
that?
yep. So the team doesn't get to look at the job description before they meet. So they talk about what types of basic skills would someone need to have to be successful in this position. They talk about transferable skills. They talk about what type of education. So this is like, they haven't even looked at the job description because then it's giving them a blind view so that they can really assess based on just the limited of what they know. So yeah, they did not know that originally the job description required the bachelor's degree. So yeah.
Did not reach consensus on that requirement of education. I mean, it was, a lot of people thought of, why do we eliminate someone that might have 20 years of experience, but only an associate's degree? It all depends. I know that we do require the bachelor's and prefer a master's, and I'm inclined to keep that, but some people brought some good points as to why we shouldn't eliminate someone right away because they don't have that requirement when they might have other qualities and they have proven that with their years of experience and what they've done before, so.
Yeah, thank you, Rosa. And on your screen, you should see the job description. So hopefully you can see it big enough there for you. But, you know, right now, the way the job description is written, it does say that a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, business, public administration, or related field is required. How does the PFC feel about that? Bachelor's, associates? And this, again, is as a minimum qualification.
Yeah, I guess I would, I go back and forth on that too, and I appreciate what the group must have gone through in regards to that, because education versus experience, and you don't necessarily want to negate one or the other, right? However, I do think that the chief's position is distinctly different than a lot of the other positions in the police force. I guess I would advocate for leaving it as having the bachelor's degree and the master's degree preferred. And I appreciate the fact we may screen out some people, but I guess I just feel pretty strongly about the educational piece. I think that it does show dedication. It shows people's desire to go back and sort of modify themselves and improve themselves and continue on professionally, even if they didn't have that when they first started. Other thoughts on that?
I would just think that if a person was a graduate of the administrative program like the FBI, National Academy, Southern Police Institute, and so forth, that if they are graduates from all of those institutions of education, that at least a bachelor's degree would seem to me to be in their grasp. Doesn't that make sense? So I would agree with what it's written as well.
Other comments? Tom? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sheena.
Sorry, I disagree respectfully. I think opening up to an associate's degree, but increasing the experience to 7 years. I think right now there's a minimal amount of applicants as well as for this position nationwide. I think what you're going to see is we're going to get more experience and more applicants by offering this associate's degree versus the bachelor's and master's preferred. And I think with this industry, yes, it shows the initiative as the bachelor's degree, but it also shows a sense of privilege requiring that. And I think right now, I think we would get some really great applicants and different applicants, because in my opinion, I think if somebody wants to be a police chief, they want to be a police chief, whether it's Fitchburg, whether it's Monona, whether it's Oregon, whether it's they just want to be a police chief. They've taken that goal upon themselves, and that might be a personal goal of theirs. You might get a couple people that only want to be a chief of Fitchburg, but I think our pool is, we're going to see candidates from other processes as well. And I think what this does is this differentiates it. I don't think it minimizes education. I think this person is still, with all the other certificates, I think this person is still very well-rounded, very educated. Like they said, we want that person with the, public speaking ability. That's important. I think we got to take a different approach. I think if we want qualified and experienced applicants, I think opening it up to the associate's degree, I don't see anything wrong with it, because again, like the master's degree is preferred. But I think we'd see a bunch more applicants if we could do the associate's degree. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Tom?
So Sheena, you mentioned that you respectfully disagree, and I think that's going to be an important thing for all of us to keep in mind as we go through this process, that we will have respectful disagreements, I think, and we will be respectful about it. We always have been on the commission, and I think I really appreciate that, Sheena, that you raised that, because I think it's going to be important to our process. So I took a look at a couple different places that have current postings for police chief. Monona required a bachelor's degree. Wauwatosa, a wonderful city in the county of Milwaukee, says it's a similar education or experience. Sun Prairie was hiring an assistant police chief and said a bachelor's degree or equivalent education or experience. This is one where I too am torn. I think there's a distinction between the minimum qualification and then the weight that you give a qualification. And I think the weight that we would give a bachelor's degree is significant, because I think the educational attainment of a bachelor's degree would be beneficial to a police chief role. Making it a minimum is tough to do, because like Sheena said, it would screen out certain candidates and candidates who might have great experience. Ron, I hadn't thought until you said it. There may be a candidate with an associate's degree only who went through the FBI National Academy, who went through some Wisconsin equivalent academy, whatever that's called, and the Northwestern Academy. They may have a lot of great experience, but just not the educational degree. So I'm torn as well, but I'm inclined to make it a minimum requirement. But if we as a commission decide not to make it a minimum requirement, I would like to give it significant weight in the consideration of individual candidates.
Yeah, so I think that's the distinction there is a great one. So meaning we have in our deciding ability, we have distinctions to be made, even if we do allow people. So if we decide to do this, we could allow more people into the process, and we could vet at that level, rather than having them just be removed at the top of the process. So I think that's a good way to think about it. Sarah, I guess a question for you. Do you have, and I'm sure you probably don't have this off the top of your head, but do we have any idea, last round, for instance, or generally, what the applicant pool looked like in regards to, did we screen out a lot, for instance?
So unfortunately, all of those stats are no longer in our applicant tracking system. I was able to find a spreadsheet with about 25 or so candidates, and I believe almost all of them had the bachelor's degree. It was the graduation from the other administrative programs that a lot of them were missing. So as far as others that applied that didn't meet the minimum qualifications at that time, I'm not sure how many of those were screened out. Otherwise, the 25 or so, I believe they all had the bachelor's degree. I think it will be common that you're going to see the bachelor's degree. It's just, There's been times in recruitment processes where, I know there's managers who might have ideas of some great people that would be excellent for a position. And then they come to HR later and they're like, well, what happened to I had someone kind of, I knew someone that might be interested, be a good fit for this position. And it's like, well, we had to screen them out. They didn't meet the minimum qualifications. And after the fact, there's nothing you can do. We've already posted it with the qualifications. So yeah, I mean, by having an associate's degree, at least, we're opening the door a bit more. But then remember, at that first step, when we have our first group meet to look at all the applicants, we're going to be giving more credit for those who have, for example, bachelor's degree and who have administrative program certificates from FBI National Academy or degrees from these areas. So, we will be getting the most qualified candidates to you. Yep, that's just a few thoughts there.
Okay. Yeah, and to Sheena's point, I think we are in different times as well. So just sort of opening the door overall may be a good way to go, and we just use that as a benchmark internally, and judging between taking person in full, right, and using that as a benchmark.
But I have to say, because we're going through very tough times right now, it's that I feel let's not relax our requirements.
Yeah.
On the contrary. So that's why I go back and forth. I understand the associate degree and someone with an associate that have gone through the different, because throughout the years, all the training that police goes to and all that, if you think in terms of credits, that could almost be a degree. But I don't know of any way of quantify that way. So.
Can I add to that, Rosa? I think right now, if I think of somebody who maybe was considering going to college to get their bachelor's degree, let's say they were enrolled 2 years ago and they were already an officer and they've got 15 years on the job. Last year, they had decided to go into, they were going to go do their training. And maybe they weren't able to finish their bachelor's degree, but they have every intention to do it. But then, the current events arose and they weren't able to complete their bachelor's degree or anything like that, but they had the intention. I would just hate to see people filtered out because they weren't able to complete that, because they're working excessive overtime or they're working, their families, everybody was in a pandemic. I think we would really, I don't think it would hurt to say associate's degree and then bachelor's and master's preferred. I think, like I said, I'm really pushing for that just because I know there's good candidates out there that have their associates, because that's kind of a beginning stage of it, right? And these other certifications are ones that are going to keep them showing that they are interested in management and leadership. So I like to give people grace on that aspect, especially considering the couple of years of current events. Not an excuse, but just grace on that. So I'd hate to see somebody washed out because they had good intentions, but they weren't able to follow through with just a bachelor's degree, but they're maintaining their family and their community and their department being under stressful circumstances. That's it.
Okay, good discussion. Do we need to put this to a vote? I guess. Because it is a difficult it's a difficult decision. I think we've had a good conversation about it, and I think everybody has that trepidation, right? At least almost everybody's voiced it. But I do think that we should put this to a vote to decide whether we want it one way or the other. I think that everybody does agree, though. Our standards should not be lowered. This doesn't necessarily lower those standards because we can evaluate people in full. But it would potentially allow more people in the door. So is there a motion to, I'll put forth a motion, I guess. I'll put forth the motion to change the minimum job qualification to say bachelor's degree with associate's degree with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree preferred.
We're going to vote on that motion?
Yep.
Second?
Second? Okay.
Well, and just one discussion point. before we vote, I guess my preference would be for a bachelor's degree strongly preferred or some language like that, with a master's degree preferred, just to distinguish between a bachelor's degree, which I do think, I think it should have significant weight in the consideration process. So I think it's fair to an applicant to point that out somehow in the application, that it would be strongly preferred if that's what we think as a whole. So that's a discussion point for this motion, I guess.
So, well, wait, so the motion would be to have an associate's degree, preferred bachelor, or strongly recommend
So I think what I'm hearing is that an associate's degree would be required, a bachelor's degree would be strongly preferred, and a master's degree would be also preferred.
That would be what I recommend. That's not your motion, but
Yep.
that's just
No,
a discussion point on your motion.
Yes, but I understand that, but I think it's a minor adjustment, but I do think that it makes sense to emphasize to the candidates that that's where we would like them to be, right?
This doesn't have to be unanimous, right, the voting?
Does not. No vote has to be unanimous, nor do they have to pass. So I guess I would propose that we make a modification to my original motion to add strongly preferred to the bachelor's degree. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. And all in favor, say aye.
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 Oppose?
Nay.
Nay.
Yep. Okay, duly noted, and thanks. Good conversation. All right, Sarah, next item.
Okay, excellent. So now we're going to move to experience. So the Equitable Hiring Tool meeting actually mentioned at least 5 years of experience. We already have 10 years of progressively responsible municipal law enforcement experience with a minimum of 5 years at a command level involving leadership, performance evaluation, and assessment, planning, budgeting, and related administrative responsibilities. We don't have to change this. Knowing that it is definitely at least over 5 years of experience is good. The big thing is that they wanted to see supervisory level experience in a police department. And I think that this experience listed here does a good job of describing that. But if the commission wants to talk a little bit about that.
Progressively reasonable municipal law enforcement experience is, as a minimum of 5, yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I know yesterday they mentioned, 7 years?
Exactly. They mentioned 7 years.
I think 10.
The only thing that kind of sticks out from here is budgeting. So our team did talk about the fact that somebody might come into this and maybe add a command level staff, did not have budgeting experience. So my proposal would be to add a and/or related administrative responsibilities required in the case that, as we're going through and screening applications, if we don't see budgeting experience, do we really want to screen somebody out because of that? I mean, we did believe that budgeting experience was something they could learn on the job. And that was just a little bit of feedback from the team on experience.
Comments from the commission? Tom?
So, yeah, just to clarify, so right now, the current position description says 10 years progressively responsible experience, and that, it sounds like this equitable group agreed with?
Yep.
And then
At least 7 is what we had, so 10 years would be just fine. Yep.
Although then our current job description says with a minimum of 5 years experience at command level involving leadership. It sounds like that's what the equitable group thought, that should maybe move to 7 from 5. Is that correct?
Yeah, supervisory, exactly. Yep. So with a minimum of 7 years experience at a command level involving leadership. Exactly.
I'd be curious what maybe Rosa, as an experienced law enforcement officer and maybe chief, if, thoughts on, I mean, is command level experience something that is, significantly beneficial for a police chief role? Is it, how strong is that as a factor?
I think you would want command level experience, because at the command level experience, you're going to get a much more broad-based experience level, particularly when you're talking about interacting with other department heads, elected officials, executive directors of community-led organizations, leading initiatives and projects and, those sorts of things, and speaking on behalf of the department in the absence of the chief or as a delegate of the chief. I think you're going to want that command level experience. And I do want to address perhaps some semantics, but Sarah's used the word supervisory experience on several occasions, and in most police departments, supervisory level experience begins at the rank of sergeant. And in a smaller department, a sergeant may be a command staff level role, but in many departments, a command staff level role begins at the rank of lieutenant, captain, whatever the case may be on their rank structure. And I appreciate the work group that worked on the equitable hiring tool, but if the commission decides they want command level experience, it would be challenging for someone with a minimum or with just 10 years of overall experience to have 7 years of command level experience, because that means they would have moved into a command level position after about 3 years on a department, which would more than likely be the time when they would be moving into more of a supervisory role at, kind of the early end of moving into a supervisory role. Overall, I think, a minimum of 10 years is suitable. And I think a minimum of 5 years command level experience is also suitable personally. But obviously that's a decision for the commission to make. And odds are your candidate pool is going to have, more than the 10 years in particular, and potentially, more than the 5 years as well.
I agree. And I'm glad you make the distinction of the supervisory position, because you're right. At the sergeant's level, you're closer to the patrol assignment. That's what you're supervising mostly, and managing staff levels and that kind of stuff. It's a big difference between the two.
So question for you, for Chad and Rosa. So when screening applications, when it comes down to, in some of these smaller places, what a sergeant, Chad, I think you mentioned it, a sergeant could be at a command level, correct?
Yeah, I think you do have to, vet the qualifications and the responsibilities out. I don't know as though I would suggest to the commission that you arbitrarily suggest someone's not meeting the minimum requirements because they have the rank of sergeant versus lieutenant or captain, because, for instance, a lieutenant in the Fitchburg Police Department may do similar work as a captain in a Madison Police Department, for example. And I do want to add, obviously, Madison Police Chief Koval was hired from the rank of sergeant, directly. So, it's not to say that it can't happen or shouldn't happen, but I think, the commission and the panels want to try to evaluate, what level of experience do they bring that indicates that command level experience, not necessarily irrespective of the rank.
Thank you.
I guess just to follow up, so I'm understanding it clearly, 10 years progressive experience, it seems like that's pretty well agreed upon, and most people are talking about that. But to achieve that 5 years of command level, involving leadership performance evaluation and assessment, it's not practical in some departments not to reach that in that 3-year period if you were to raise that to 5, correct? Or to raise that to 7, I'm sorry. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on this section in minimum qualifications from the commission?
I thought it was, I'm sorry, so just to clarify, so it's 10 years with law enforcement experience, and then with a minimum of 5 years experience at command level. So I guess I read that as 10 years as law enforcement and then 5 years, so 15 years total would be where that's, so I must have misread that. So we're saying right now we want 10 years, but 5 of the 10 years has to be at a command level. Is that what it reads? Is that how it reads?
Yep, exactly. That's how it should read. If it doesn't read that way, we can make it clearer too. But that's the goal, is that they have, and this is exactly the requirements we had back in 17 too, the bachelor's and then the 10 years, including the 5 years of command level. So I didn't change this at all. But yeah, that's exactly what that's saying. Sheena, you're right.
Okay,
That's a good point that Chief brought up regarding
yep.
the opportunity for that command level at year 5 on a department. So
Sounds to me like we're leaning towards keeping this exactly how it is, correct? There was a further question down below, though, with budgeting and related administrative responsibilities. I guess I just don't know that much about that, so I guess, Chief, do you have an opinion on that? Is the budgeting aspect something people can learn on the job? Is it something we should have as a minimum requirement?
I think Sarah proposed a reasonable solution there by putting an and/or. That allows, the commission and the panels to evaluate the whole body of qualifications. And, somebody may come in with more budgeting experience than something else, and another candidate may, come in with more, personnel management, for instance, than budgeting experience. But then, the panel can use and the commission can use how it's, what other qualifications do they bring to the table? How's their performance been through the process and those sorts of things? I don't know as though you weigh necessarily one above the other. I mean, clearly you want to have the leadership skills without a doubt, but somebody coming from a larger agency, they may have, a more specified or specific area of focus at their command level. So I think the and/or is a good way to write that. So that just allows that flexibility to evaluate the overall qualifications.
Okay. Points from the commission on that one? Questions? Okay. Do we need to vote on the slash for and/or? I think that
Do
probably
we?
should do that formally, yes, just because it is a change to the minimal requirements. And so just to be clear, what we're talking about doing is for budgeting and related administrative responsibilities and responsibilities required. We're talking about, yep, exactly like that. That's what we're proposing, just so everybody can see it up in front. Because I do think that Chief's point's excellent in regards to involving leadership, performance evaluation, and assessment. I mean, those are core components that aren't flexible, I would say.
So I'll move to adopt the recommendation that Sarah outlined here to add the and/or between budgeting and related administrative responsibilities.
Okay. All in favor of
Aye.
the motion? Aye?
Aye?
Great, so we are going to talk about supplemental questions right now. So I'm going to share my screen again so that we can look at some of the recommendations that Rosa made in the hiring tool meeting that the team was all about. I'm going toward the bottom here, so not to make you dizzy here. All right. Okay, so if you look down here at the bottom, these are the essay questions that we'll ask at the time of application. And these were borrowed from Madison's interview questions when they had hired their police chief. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, we only need 3 questions. And a couple of these maybe relate. So the first question, many of your colleagues are leaving the police profession because something has fundamentally changed. That's misspelled there. Explain to us why you are not only staying, but applying to be a leader in this challenging time. Number 2, what would be your strategy to improve overall recruiting by the police department? Speak specifically about your experience and approach recruiting people with marginalized identities. Number 3, cities today struggle with finding balance between establishing appropriate public safety and support strategies and protecting people's civil rights and human dignity. What would you do to find this balance? And number 4, what is the importance of officer wellness and how does it fit into the portfolio of responsibility for the police chief? How has this concept and your understanding of it evolved over the course of your career? So again, in our meeting, we talked about the need for this police chief to help with our recruitment and retention efforts, focusing on officer wellness. And, why are they wanting to be a police chief at a time like this? So what are the commission's thoughts about those essay questions to require at the time of applying?
And just a clarification, Sarah, are you thinking those would be the only questions, or we
No.
would pick one of those to add to, I think you had suggested some proposed ones from the last time we got together.
Yeah, we did have a couple of proposed ones from last time, so I will share my screen so you can see those as well. Wish I could show a couple things at the same time, but if you recall from last time, there was a question regarding like defunding the police and how you would address that. Here's the ones from last time. Number 3 we talked about last was, what is your response to calls to defund the police, and how do you respond to both the public and your officers who may be asking how to answer this proposal? So that was one. So yeah, we can pull from any of these, but we really need to have 3 for our recruitment.
3 number, I'm not an HR person, obviously, but it seems like you would want to limit this on some level because just the extent of it might be, difficult to digest for a whole bunch of reasons and difficult to answer. So is 3 sort of a standard number, or how is that arrived at?
3 questions really help. Otherwise it can get really long to review applications, but you learn a lot from the different candidates, and you can kind of see how much effort they put into applying and how much they really care about the position. So 3 is our typical number for all recruitment that are at this level. So, I can't go back to the others. Did you like any of these? If you didn't like any of the questions, we can also, entertain other ones. Would you like to see the other ones again, or would you like to read through these and just see if there's any for sure to keep, and then we can go back to the other one?
I guess, so I haven't gone through the ones from yesterday, but I went through the ones from this last week. And I guess with 5 people doing this, I think this could take a while, but these are critical questions also at the same time. I'm just not sure the best method of us going through this sort of in an efficient manner. I guess from maybe, did everybody have a chance, I guess, to review these 7 questions that were proposed for last week? And I went through, I sort of ranked them for myself. And then maybe we could look at these, and then we could go back to that other list. I don't want to neglect the other list because we value what that panel has put forth. But I just had some base ideas on the 7 that were proposed from this last week that I guess I would provide up front. I did like a lot number 2. After reassessing the list, I liked number 2 a lot, mainly because they're key pieces that we're asking of the applicant, and we are leaving it open to them to explain sort of what their experience has been directly in those areas. And I think that we can learn a lot in regards to that. And specifically on number 2, I guess if we were going to go with that, I would make a recommendation of adding community engagement and relationship building, just because I think that is going to be a key component coming out of COVID and just generally in the times we live in. I know our current chief has done a lot in that area, and I think that we would all like to have that replicated. So number 2 is one that I would recommend that I liked out of the list. And then the other one that I did like, I liked the first one, which I like behavioral questions, just in general, and that ask a person to describe something specifically that they were involved in that had to do with an organizational change that had been implemented. It could have been something they did, something they inherited, something that they were a part of. But I like the way that question is phrased because it makes them give a specific example of something they did. So those are the 2 that I picked out, I guess, out of that list. And maybe others could go through and give their opinion on that list of 7, and we can come to some kind of consensus.
Yeah, well, I gave a lot of thought to number 3, and I came up with a different question without mentioning defunding the police. And this is what I wrote. It's something like, how do you get to understand, asking that to a police chief candidate, the way communities of color experience law enforcement and how that could become part of a dialogue. instead of going straight to defunding the police, which has some negative connotation for a lot of people. But I like that question in terms of what I'm looking for. It's if this person has an understanding of how we got to the point where we have people making a statement like that. I think it's important that we have a question reflecting those issues that we're facing with right now.
Okay.
So I'll offer comments on these 7. Very helpful to have them, so thank you, Sarah, and whomever else helped prepare them and for the thought so far. I really, and I think if I recall in that equitable group, they suggested as part of the community survey that we ask about kind of challenges facing police departments and specifically Fitchburg, and how do you see addressing those challenges? So I like number 4. Maybe not for the application, but maybe for the survey of residents as well, at least. I'll skip 5 for now, and then number 6, I like that as well, and I think it ties into some of the concerns some people have about integrity and confidence. I don't think in the Fitchburg Police Department, but maybe in policing as a whole. I like number 5 because it speaks to facts and doesn't assume anything about our Fitchburg Police Department. I don't think our Fitchburg Police Department has some of the problems that other police departments or individual police officers have in other communities. But it's a fact that Fitchburg is rich in the diversity of its residents, and that fostering an environment that promotes and celebrates diversity, equity, and inclusion is a very important aspect of what the police chief will do. So I like number 5 to get at the issues that I think are bubbling out of the equitable group and that come from this defund the police type mantra. But I think number 5, the way it's drafted, is factual. I think it'll be hard for applicants to answer what I consider to be loaded questions, like what the equitable tool in the city of Madison recommended, and like number 3, defund the police. I think that's going to be hard for applicants to answer in writing. Maybe those questions are better for us as a police and fire commission in our interviews or the community interviews, and that may be an appropriate question. I just think it's hard to do at that stage in writing as part of an initial application. So that's why I like 4, 5, and 6 here.
Just a comment based on what you just said. It is true that Fitchburg, it's a good police department, and that so far we have not seen the issues that other police departments have faced. That doesn't mean that we should not be prepared for if something like that were to happen. We are also very close to other police departments where they could be facing some of that, and where we would be, as a police department, pulled into that to assist whatever the case may be, and we should be knowledgeable in understanding what's going on in the community and why. I think number 3, it's an important, to me, question to have, not necessarily worded that way, but yes, to me, it's very important to know that our next chief understands the dynamics that have been taking place for so long in our country.
I guess I would just say, though, does 5 get to some fair bit of that, if not all of it, through the question of, for instance, how have you demonstrated that commitment, and how would you yourself see yourself demonstrating it here?
I just want to make sure that we don't ask questions that we're going to get cliche answers. And we do that, that people know. And I'm not, that's my concern, that we were going to hear what we want to hear. And Sarah, I would defer to you for that. I mean, I'm not an expert in that necessarily, but
We asked for 5 for a city administrator, and it was very interesting. I mean, when you ask someone to tell you about how they demonstrated that commitment, you get actual personal experience and what they've actually done. So it wasn't just tell us what it means to you or why it's important. It was tell us how you show that commitment and how you've demonstrated living that. So it was very telling, and it was a really good question. We were pretty happy we used it. What I'll do is I'll share my screen with the other one. Fact TV is letting me know that there's a meeting right behind us here. So I don't mean to rush by any means, but I'm going to share my screen back to the hiring tool so you can see the other questions, just to see if anyone wants to elaborate on those 4 that are there. Does anyone like them? Rose, I know you had mentioned these 4 specifically.
I'm sorry, am
I think she had asked you about
Oh.
number 4 specifically.
oh,
Yeah, so I'm curious.
you know, I
if
like
Commissioner-
number 1 a lot because we're experiencing a lot of people leaving the profession right now in, for many different reasons. But yeah, I would like to, that question to me will show me a lot about where they're coming from.
I guess one of the things to keep in mind maybe is these are screener questions, right? So they're coming along with the application. And so when I think of things like number 5, I like that question. But we may want to ask that as a council group, or as a commission, I should say, because we want to hear those answers. And we can ask follow-ups to that specifically. So that may serve some of the things that you're talking about, as well. So not having that necessarily as a screener, but having that as a method of,
Yeah, sure.
because it's more bi-directional at that point, right? And, to Tom's point, I do like factual questions just generally, but I like them for the screener questions in particular because it's a little easier, I think, for HR to sort of objectify those, right? So they can say, yep, this is what they said, and they check off these boxes. Because that screening is really, I think, more geared towards that process. And sort of some of the more complex, I'll say, questions are really probably best handled at the second level. That's my opinion, though.
Yeah, no, you're right on, Jeff. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
And so to that end, I think that these are all good questions. This is just me, but I think that most of these lend themselves to that conversational, not necessarily the initial screening. I guess that's why I would go back to 1 and 2, which is why I sort of chose those 2 as far as what I would like to see, just because they are sort of bullet pointed and specific.
I agree. I accept that.
Is it fair to say, maybe we can all agree that some of these supplemental, these initial questions are maybe more focused on what have they done? What have you done as this person? And then maybe when we get to the next stage is what are you going to do?
It's a pretty good way to sum that up, yes.
That.
Yep.
Right, because I understand I could understand the complication that would come with if we then want to see what their future, I think these are all very important topics, but if we focus on what have they done, like the budgeting, the bargaining, I think the bargaining, the collective bargaining is very important, that union involvement, what have you done for performance management, what have you done? And then we get to the next stage, or maybe you can include it in one of the questions is what do you envision? What will you do? If we break it up like that, I don't know if that will help us kind of narrow in, because I know.
That's a nice way actually to break that up. And to that end, based on that and based on reading these, and I know I already submitted 1 and 2, but I think that they fall into that category. But I also think 6 does as well, because it asks a specific question about what steps would you take to maintain the integrity and community confidence. So what will you do? Again, getting back to your point. And all of these questions, or I should say the remainder of them, right, can be used in that second stage.
Sarah, how did you come up with these questions?
Yeah, so a couple of them were from the interview questions that were used in the police chief process. Number 5 was used for the city administrator, and then number 1 and 2 were actually used in the 2017 recruitment process as supplemental questions. So we definitely did use 1 and 2, and that worked for us then.
I think 4 is another good question too, because then you're gonna see everybody's different opinions on that. But again, I think that's an opinion-based question, and I don't know how you would address that in the early stages. I love that question. I think you can learn a lot from people to see what they think the 2 biggest. And I agree with Rosa, is we don't wanna do questions that just kind of provide lip service or, essentially just telling us what they think we want to hear. I think that's really important.
So am I hearing from the commission that you were on board with question 1, question 2, and then maybe question, is it 5 or 6 as the 3rd question?
I had suggested 6, but
Rick?
How about both? I know 3 is traditional, but
yeah.
I wouldn't mind seeing more.
Although, so that said, Tom, I would say that 5, I think, does really lend itself to that back and forth, and maybe we should
Yeah.
have that as that second level question. I know, we're not discounting any of these. Again, I think 3 is a bit of an arbitrary number, but at the same time, I'm going with the HR person saying 3 is the magic.
Well, just to throw this out there, one of the really important things the hiring team did talk about was the diversity of Fitchburg and how we want someone who has experience working, in diverse communities and has a commitment to that. And so we would be able to get at that right when they apply, whether or not, it was telling in the administrative process. We would actually see only a couple sentences related to this question, and it was clear that there wasn't a demonstration or a commitment to diversity and equity. So whatever essay questions we use, we want to make sure they're the most important to the commission and making sure our next police chief has that experience.
Well,
We're going to know that they're going to have hopefully we'll know some of the experience from their qualifications like performance management, employee development, supervision, but some of this other stuff might not be as apparent. So I'm just throwing that out there for the commission to consider.
Yeah, I guess just to dovetail off of that, just because let's just say we went with 1, 2, and 5, and you get that information up front for the initial screening, there's nothing stopping us from asking those questions or something similar and having that back and forth as a commission with the second round of applicants. So it doesn't need to stop there, right?
No.
So maybe that is the question to ask up front, given the fact it was important to the focus group that was put together, and it's obviously important to the commission and to the city.
1, 2, and 5? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's what we're leaning towards. Other thoughts on the questions overall or on those ones specifically? All right. Do we have a motion?
So last question really quick. I know Scott's trying to get me out of here. So the survey, this is really important. This is a really important piece. There were a lot of recommendations from the team about how to do this. One of the most important things is the question. So I don't want to rush the survey, and I'm wondering if we need to have some off, meeting, a discussion about that. What I could do is work with all of you outside of the meeting in terms of just sending an email and then trying to work through, I don't know, Jeff, you and I can maybe talk about it after this meeting, how to make sure we get the survey where everyone's on the same page. But ideally, we wanted to get the survey out next week when we post the position. But we plan to have it open a whole month, so we will have a couple. If we can't get it up next week, we could put it up the week after. The point is that we'll have it open for quite a while.
I guess, so one of the things we could do is, I wrote down a timeline today essentially based on your timeline, but specifically about the items that we could talk about at those meetings. And I kept coming back to the fact I think we should have one before June 23rd. And maybe even quite sooner than that to talk about that survey. So I think that maybe we should move forward with the job description and finalize that here with these questions. So we should vote on that, and we should formally say that we want those 3, if that's in fact what we decide. And then for the survey, so this is the public survey and the employee survey. If everybody on the commission could take a close look at that, I'll work with Sarah to try to set up a meeting sometime in the next couple of weeks so that we can address that specifically. Because I tend to agree that we should get that out. It doesn't need to be exactly when the job posting goes out, but it should be soon, right around that time.
Okay.
Great idea, Jeff.
And I'm being sensitive to time as well. All right, so do we have a motion just to finalize the supplemental questions for the application?
I'll move to add the supplemental questions that are listed as numbers 1, 2, as revised by Jeff, which includes community engagement and relationships,
Yep.
and one other, I think.
I believe, no, relationships.
Okay. And then, so numbers 1, numbers 2, and number 5.
Second.
Very good. And all in favor of the motion on the floor, say aye.
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 Anybody in objection, say nay. So moved. Thank you very much, Sarah, for all your work on that. And thank you to everybody on the commission for the good debate over it, because I think we came to a good consensus. All right. Any announcements? Next item out. No announcements, hearing none? Okay.
You know, I guess one thought, as we move through this process, it might be nice to not schedule meetings after us, or maybe even to plan for that, just so we have a chance to fully discuss these issues, which I think are important. I don't know what's next. I'm sure it's important as well, but just to make sure we're not feeling kind of tight for time in our meetings, if there's a way to schedule them so that we're not rushed, I think would be helpful.
You mean, so we don't have a deadline at 7 o'clock, you mean? So that if we need with further discussion, we can do that? Is that
No
what you mean
dinner.
Specifically? Yeah. No, and
Yeah,
to
I
that,
didn't say that PFC, there's no meetings after PFC, but I think there's a big public meeting at 7,
Okay.
Scott. I don't remember what it is, but there's typically no meetings after our PFCs, so it's just kind of a weird, because on our Wednesday, it's only us usually, but.
okay, and to that end, I think that having a couple of additional meetings and breaking some of that up and getting that a little better organized, I think will help with that as well. And I fully agree that we need to make sure that we're vetting this material as best as we can as a group. Okay, so if there are no announcements, motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second? All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.